name? They used to work over there. Braxton, yeah. He's like, hey, does he still work there? I'm like, I'll let him tell you. And then the other day, I asked him if he still works there. Kind of work around the question. He's like, I already know. All I know is he got MIA. He took time off, and then he got MIA. That's it.
Okay, who does not have, we passed out copies of an introduction to OSHA packet. I said bring it to next class, but I'm pretty sure I didn't get everybody. Who does not have a copy of this? Everybody here does? Okay, fabulous. Good job. I am going to pass around, we will talk about it when we get there on the slides, but we have, I have a dual role with what I want to pass around. This is a copy of a Fat Cat report, fatalities and casualties, from 5 years ago. And there's a purpose for that. One, that is the most current year that OSHA makes readily available to the general public for resolution, time for resolution of lawsuits, for time of grieving for people that have been impacted by the accidents. And so that's a respectful scenario, although the Fat Cat reports are available to those that are authorized for access immediately. We have to report to the OSHA authorities within 8 hours of a fatality at our workplace. So we're on the phone immediately. If it happens during the middle of the night, they still expect a call within 8 hours. So at 10 o'clock at night, they need that reported before 6 a.m. Even if your day shift hadn't got there and the president of the company isn't there, they need to call it home. And I mean, it's not a funny matter. You know, you've had a tragedy that's occurred at work, and OSHA expects everybody to immediately jump to, we want to immediately jump to an investigation. We want to know how to do that. We will talk in this class how to do that. What do you do if the worst happens? You get an accident at work. What is it that you need to be trained in order to how to respond as a company? And many don't know how to do that at all, and so we will go through the training for that in this class. But anyway, I'm going to pass around this older Fat Cat report that you can just browse through. The print is super small, but it's already nine pages or something. For this 1 year, there were 526 fatalities, and that's an awful lot of husbands and wives and children without a dad or a mom, and that's tragic on that. But you can look through this for what it's worth, but on the very back page of it, it's blank. And what I want you to do, even though I think I have it current for everybody, we're entering data for this class into our North Star system. I want to make sure I still have the right email address for you, have the right cell phone number for you. I've changed cell phone numbers in the last year and a half or something like that, and it's not stayed current for me. So I want to make sure we've got the right first and last name, email address, and cell phone number just for each of you. If you'd write it on here, that will be helpful. I will see that we have the right information in our system so that we spell your name right on your certificate and stuff like that. So if you'll take the time to do that during class, I would appreciate it. I didn't say hello, good afternoon to any of you. I think perhaps Taylor was here first, and I did, but I'm not even 100% sure I did that. And so I didn't mean to be lost in a cloud and not social at all, because we came out of a celebratory weekend, whether it was a long weekend or not, depending on who we worked for, right? But still, we were acknowledging some important events in the history of Utah. And they turned that into a fireworks celebration on Monday night. So if your kids got a chance to go see that, Washington City, I understand, did a good job. I could hear it, but I didn't get to see it. Anybody go?
Yeah.
See fireworks? Yeah.
Yeah, I accidentally drove by that street, like the one by the.
Accidentally?
Well, accidentally. Well, I wasn't driving. The girlfriend was. We're gonna go to towards the Desert Industries, that road 2450.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I guess she drops off a lady in that area. She's like, oh, she told me this is a shortcut. I'm like, you're really gonna go into the middle of like everything's packed. So as soon as we turned left, right there by the rec center, that whole street was full of cars, people everywhere on top of their cars. But as soon as we turned on that street, the fireworks started.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
so it was just like, no, they were ending. So as soon as they let those big ones at the end go, it was like perfect. I'm like, oh, we drove here just on time.
You had front row seats right there
Yeah.
in your car.
But there was so much traffic, and
Yeah.
cops everywhere there.
Well, that's cool. You got to see it. That's good.
That's
And,
close, yeah. So.
you know, I've watched fireworks from time to time just on a commercial flight, leaving or landing in a city where the fireworks are going on. They don't look impressive from the air at all. You know, you're looking down onto just a noisy blend of lights, and you know what they are, but you're looking down at them. But when you're right under them like that,
Yeah.
holy cow! From a distance, they're not even quite as impressive. We had a lot of people up here on the mesa for the 4th of July. I understood from our security team, and but that's still a little. It was good view, but it's a little far away. It's nothing like being there,
Yeah.
unless you take your dog, and then that's a problem. I don't know a dog alive that likes fireworks. I don't think actually any of them do. Let me make sure this is rolling. It is. We're in good shape. All right. So we're looking at starting with the requirements from OSHA. We want to knock those out and discuss a solid background of what OSHA wants us to understand, and perhaps depending on how far we get today, at break time we'll go over to Building B kind of together, and we'll borrow some laptop computers that we can bring back into this room, unless there may be some already in the room that we can use. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask one of the individuals there. TJ and Jaredon would know, but they are both away on a training mission today, and had indicated that they would be, and they're going to review the video that we'll post up of class today so that they don't miss anything, and that they stay current with all of the rest of us on as far as the OSHA requirements are concerned. So we've got a couple of videos that we're going to watch today, and we are going to dig back into the slides that we started talking about, and then we started looking at photographs of what was okay and what's not okay, and we'll do a little bit more of that as well today. And we won't redo the ones we've already talked about, but we will look a little bit further. One of the posters that we will look at, we did mention, is this blue and yellow poster that is posted in English and Spanish in most workplaces. It has to be in all workplaces, but it doesn't have to be in both languages in all workplaces. That is the discretion of the company, and based on the requirement of whether or not every employee has to speak English. In some industries, that is a requirement. If you are an airline pilot anywhere in the world, the official air traffic control language is English. Doesn't matter where you are. And what that means is the Russians were slow to comply. That's what that means. There are still air communications that I heard just a few months ago in Europe that were not in English. But if the two that are talking are interrupted by a third that says English, it's international law that they have to speak in English. In some industries, the medical device and the pharmaceutical industries are two examples. It's not uncommon for the regulations to be so exhaustive to understand that a partial fluency in language doesn't cut it. And so if I'm in a plant in Tokyo, for example, a marginal understanding of Japanese, even though I might be conversational, would not qualify for me to work for a Japanese company that has all of their quality management system in Japanese. And we have the opposite in the United States here. We have some pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies that have chosen English as their only language and therefore require everyone that comes to work in that company to have a working knowledge of the industry and the language it's the English required for that industry. That's a personal opinion on how you feel about it. It's if you feel strongly about that, only work for a company that allows both languages that are of interest to you. In some places, we have populations that encourage the company to put their quality management system in multiple languages. But one of the dangers of that, quality management system and safety systems are not the same. So quality management system, or a QMS by short, most ISO 9000 or related types of companies, ISO 13485 or D1 9000 for Boeing, or the automotive 7200, the various regulations that are out there are almost always in English first and then in some subsequent set of languages. And depending on your workforce, you may publish your quality management system in an appropriate language for your workforce. For example, Gateway Computers, you might remember that company. They used to be a viable company in the computer business with the cow imprint. They started out in South Dakota and they had plants all over in California and they still exist. Gateway is not gone as a company, but they're not dominant. They've been, HP and Dell have displaced their position as the dominant choice for laptops. IBM withdrew, and that left a vacuum in the laptop space that they sold it to Lenovo, and Lenovo tried to pick that up. But we had Gateway plants that had accidentally, according to their story to me, they had accidentally hired employees that were deaf, and they could only speak with American Sign Language or some version of sign language, and they got into trouble with that at some point. They had a mixed response with it, mostly from the employees' perspective, an awesome response. The deaf community turned out to be a super good recruitment pool for Gateway. The deaf employees that they hired were very grateful for not being considered handicapped, and I use that word just colloquially, is what it was called, that you're something weird because you can't hear. And we all have enough training in diversity and enough sense to understand that that's a very archaic way of thinking, and we need to provide reasonable accommodation to everybody, regardless of what the issues are that they are the challenges that they are facing. But Gateway responded and said, "This is cool. The employees we're hiring are they stay longer. They report on time, and as a group, it was a very satisfactory experience for Gateway." The only problem was, OSHA said, how do you tell them there's a fire in the building? How do you announce an emergency if you've got 30% of your employee population is impaired?
Flashing lights.
There were answers, but they had to be standard. There was no when OSHA asked the question, there was no accommodation, and so at that point, Gateway said, well, for that matter, how do we tell them the quality's not right? How do we tell them we got a problem, we need to do this or that? And they realized that in terms of normal production, everything was fine, but it was when something was wrong, like there's an emergency, stop the conveyor. How do you say that? And so we put together, and my company got contracted to teach American Sign Language to the supervisors. So the supervisors had enough, and one of the lexicons we put together is what are the emergency phrases that you might need to use, and you need to memorize those and learn them. I don't speak American Sign Language myself, and I wish I did. I've got a spastic left hand. It won't work. I can't make it. That's my piano problem too. I can't make it work the way I want it to. And so we did the same thing, similar thing to the Salt Lake Police Department, where it wasn't from a safety point of view as much as it was from a public safety point of view. How do you teach every officer to say, show me your hands in Spanish. And the emergency thing commands that a police officer, regardless of their core language, needs to use in certain neighborhoods where there's expected populations of Bosnian or Kurdish speakers or not all Spanish. I mean, there are many languages that we have, but that we find pockets of them, and from a public safety perspective, we may need to address that. So if your company winds up hiring, in Utah, we've had an influx of Ukrainian people. Why? Because Russia invaded Ukraine, right? And that hit us, and America, with limited fairness, has opened the borders to refugees, right? I say limited fairness because I don't want to weigh in on the politics of that. There's a mess on who we let in and why and when, and I don't understand enough of it to even want to argue it, except I can say it looks like a big problem, and we need to somehow fix that someday. But right now, regardless of how or what, we have populations in Salt Lake and in St. George of Ukrainians that have never had an opportunity to learn English. When you were born in Ukraine, you learned native Ukrainian if you were on the west side of the country, and your second language in school was Russian. And if you were on the east side of the country, your core language was Russian, and maybe you learned Ukrainian on the side. But nowhere was English on the menu, right? Because of an era that was. And we find that in East Germany as well. The kids, in fact, most of what we would call the Iron Curtain countries in Eastern Europe, most of them in grade school, didn't have the opportunity to learn English. They learned their native mother tongue, a dialect or two, and Russian. And they speak 3 or 4 languages, which is amazing to me. It's incredible that, but one of them isn't English. And so when we find these pockets in our workforce, we have an opportunity to make our place a safer place by helping them learn the phrases in English for emergency and safety things, like stop is not the same in all languages, and we ought to practice what that command is, and make our workplace a safer place. And if we are finding that we're hiring a handful of Ukrainians in our workforce, understand that we have more than just a quality issue with that. We have a safety scenario for their safety and for our safety that we need to be actively addressing. Now, active in addressing, to me, is interesting. I have some experience with my company in teaching various languages, Vietnamese, doesn't matter what they are, a string of languages. But what I found to be interesting in that, and I'm not a multilingual myself, I really wish I was, but what I found to be is that there are 2 groups of people in every workforce there are English speakers that are quick to learn other languages and other words. And they real quick learn how to order beer in any language and to pick up a chick in any language. And tell a dirty joke in any language. These are the things that they learn fast. Well, identify those people and redirect or focus that skill, because everybody doesn't have that skill. Find the people that naturally have that skill in our workplace. There's people that are just fascinated with other languages, and they're the ones that will pick up and help us the fastest. Then there's another thing to discover. There's what I would call a phrase book. Let me back up. Before we would build a phrase book, we would go into our workplaces and we would identify the nouns. So in this classroom, this is a desk. We might call it a workstation as well. There's a computer, there's a camera, there's a clock. What are the nouns that are in this room? A window, a door, the floor, the ceiling, all of the nouns. We would list the nouns that are in this workplace, if this is where we all are working every day, and then we would start a index of what is that word in Bosnian and in English, or what is it in Spanish and in English. What is that word in whatever language we're trying to provide more connection with. So we'll create that lookup of the nouns. Then we'll create a lexicon of the things that we do, the activities, so we'll call it phrases. I need to go to the bathroom. Time is lunch. Is it time for break? You know, phrases that we would use in our workplace here. We need more materials. This is ready to go to shipping. You know, whatever the phrases are in our work spot, there's probably not as many as you think, because we kind of just do our thing and it's repetitive, right? And so we would catalog those, and then we would write those in both languages. Now, once we've got those two reference materials, and I'd put them on people's cell phones as well as written copies, because different people take in information differently. I'd make it audio, I'd make it written, and we would develop that with over a little bit of time. Then we would split into groups of 4, and I call them quads, just because that's a word for 4. The Germans use it on their Audis, right? Quattraport, and the Maseratis use it too. So groups of 4, 2 English speakers and 2 whatever language as far as basic. So let's say it's Spanish. I would get 2 English speakers, 2 Spanish speakers, and they would form a team that's required to go on break once, twice a week together. So you're taking your break time together, and you have a little assignment to help each other with the list. So the English speakers are helping the Spanish speakers are helping the English speakers. Now, but here's the help key. This is what it's a difference from the way most people approach it. The English speakers that are picking up a second language, the problem they have is vocabulary. They don't have the words. They don't know. They just don't have the words. Using Spanish as an example, Spanish speakers have many more words than they realize, but they don't have the correct pronunciation of those words. I'll give you an example. The word for machine in Spanish is what? Máquina. It's the right word. It's exactly the same word. It's maybe even spelled the same. I don't know if it is or not. But it's the same word, but if you say it, I don't recognize it. You're using the right word, but you're pronouncing it differently than in English, so I don't recognize it. That's a communication fail, not on the Spanish person's part, on the English person's part, because you used the right word and I didn't understand it. Okay, so we work on pronunciation. So you can pronounce the word in both languages. Same word, but it's pronounced differently in the 2 languages, right? There are how many of those? Thousands of those words. You're using the right word, but I don't understand it. Holy cow, let's work on that, right? So our quads are working on, you're helping me add Spanish words to my vocabulary, because I don't know the Spanish words. And you're helping me add those. And maybe this break we're just going to talk about the door and the window. And that's all, you know. And so you tell me the different ways to use it and make it feminine and masculine and whatever the things are about it that I need to know. And I'll pick that up in a few minutes. And if you drill me on it tomorrow, I might remember those 2 things, just 2 words, right? I might remember it. And then we're gonna talk about Mac and machine, you know. And so practice that a few times so that we get it. And this is true whether you're talking about German accents. You know, how many Germans do you know that have been here for 30 years and you still can't understand them because they're speaking English words with a complete German accent that viva fixes, you know, and you go, what did you just say? I don't know what you said. You used all the right words, but with the wrong accent. And so does that make sense? This helps us in speed up and connect our communication. I'm talking about it today from a safety point of view. So if we're looking from a machining point of view, if we're looking at it from a process point of view, a production point of view, a lean point of view, an efficiency point of view, we're worried about the nouns, we're worried about the phrases. If we're looking at it from a safety point of view, we are looking at it from a point of view of what can get you hurt and what do you need to understand in any language. Fire is not, what is that word, so that I recognize the word, so that the supervisors especially can bark out emergency commands. If we got a shooter in the building, I don't want somebody to go, I didn't know what you said. I want everybody to understand and be able to respond to that. And in this case, I would ask for native tongue speakers to say it again for me, so that I'd make sure we got a double communication of understanding. And aircraft, they do that with the pilot, co-pilot. Even though English is the demanded language, everybody isn't as fluent are equally fluent in English. And so, if air traffic control gives a command, I want it repeated so that we know we're doing the right thing. 30,000 feet, whatever. Yes, sir.
Just touching on the same communication. When I worked at Viracon, they had a intercom. So if something was happening, like they would, if someone were to cut themselves or something to get the manager's attention, they'd say the location, stuff like that. But with active shooters, and say, just for instance, if someone were to come inside the building, they wouldn't announce it as active shooters. When we would have a meeting, they would say, Mr. Hyde West. So that means stay away from the west side, because Mr. Hyde was the
bad guy.
Yeah, Mr. Hyde was the bad guy. But there was people that spoke Spanish that didn't understand that. So that's just, it reminded me of that, because they would ask us that speak both English and Spanish, like, what does Mr. Hyde mean? It's just like a title for the bad person.
Yeah.
Because if someone were to come in and someone says Mr. Hyde West, or active shooter West, he's gonna know where everybody's gonna run, or he's gonna have some idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you had a code
Yeah, they had
set up. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it was so loud in there that you couldn't understand what they were saying. Sometimes
Right.
on the intercom. So that was kind of a bad thing sometimes.
Well, we struggle with communication always, and we have things like that, like environmental conditions that make it hard to communicate. But our job is to fight it. Is to come up and somebody said visual. If I've got a room full of hearing impaired people, it's all about visual, isn't it? So I need to get messages across. I need to have a different communication system. And fortunately, Gateway made screens. They could put screens everywhere, and they did. And so, now it's because now it became a challenge of isolating the proper screens. So, what are you going to look at? It's the wall to wall, assault on your senses. And so, how do you put the important messages right up front? You can make all screens say the same thing, and every now and again, the casinos do that just to prove to you how they can get your attention. Not with emergency, but they want you to put something put a coin in the box. I think is what they want. All right, so that's kind of where we're starting out. Let's proceed. We talked about this slide saying that I was approaching a few of the rules the same as the military does, and it's hard for us to understand when we think about safety in an environment. There are certain things that it seems like OSHA, doesn't get a clue, doesn't have a clue. They don't know, how do you do this? And, military stuff is an example of that. How do you crawl under live machine gun fire and call it a safe workplace? And so you have to go through enough to make it as safe as you possibly can under the circumstances. So a job hazard analysis, it requires things like, okay, you're a wide receiver in the National Football League. That's a dangerous job. So they have made certain things that make it more dangerous, the rules, so it's less dangerous. You can't clip a guy's leg out from under him. They call that clipping. And there are rules of where you can tackle, how you can tackle, when you can tackle, that are constantly reevaluated to move the sport to keep an exciting sport, but make it so that the guys can live till retirement without long-term, obvious injury. And so we think like what happened to Muhammad Ali, with brain damage that occurred from repeated life of concussion after concussion after concussion. Is that directly correlated? Do we know what? We're learning. We're trying to decide what should be done. So should the rules change in certain types of contact boxing and fighting, so that we don't have the same kinds of injury that take a person out? It's no longer a sport. I'm not weighing in on those as much. I will talk a little bit about the basic training where you have to, there is no way to simulate what my body is going to do if live machine gun fires over my head. There's no way. Now, in truth, a certain amount of that is tracer fire and blanks at first, so they can gauge me. Am I going to bolt and run? If I'm going to bolt and run, don't put me under live machine gun fire. Get me in the kitchen or someplace where I don't have to go through something that is going to jeopardize the rest of my team, because it's a reaction that I'm doing, and I'm not telling the Army how to do it. I'm just explaining that the thought process, it's something they have to know how you're going to respond. They can't just ask you a question. Do you promise that you'll obey orders? Do you promise that you'll crawl into a dangerous situation? Yeah, I promise I will. They're not going to know until they do that. So they try to then take the danger and make part of it believed and not real. And we can all do that kind of thing, and those are called simulations. And so we can go into step by step into types of simulations that make bad decisions less fatal or less dangerous. OSHA wants us to be able to do that regardless of what the specific issue is. We have a welder, for example, in a welding shop that's a video game. It's a plastic nozzle, and it's a machine that looks just like a machine, and you wear a helmet that looks just like a welding helmet, and you can look around. It's virtual reality. You can look around where you're at. You can see the back wall of the shop. It's cool. And then you can go strike an arc and make a weld. And based on all of the parameters, you see how well you're doing under no danger. No heat, no sparks, no thought that you're going to catch your pants on fire. And so you can do that enough times that you can gain confidence to go in where it really is dangerous, or more dangerous. Welding is not a tame sport, right? Welding has hazards associated with it. And yet we all have done it, and we're all around it, and we have the ability to do it in our workplace, but we have the responsibility to do it in our workplace in a way that is safe to the people that are working there. Topic 1, we've seen the video. We're going to see another one or two, probably more than one or two, but today we'll see one or two that address the issue. But it started with OSHA putting a video in front of us that said, we are a bad group of employers in America, and we have been for a while, and there are places in the world that are even worse, still are, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do something about it. And so we are doing something about it, and we are seeing that a lot of people still die every day at work, and people shouldn't have to. On top of that, we have an awful lot of non-fatal injuries that are a result of us going to work. So we get cut, we get repetitive motion problems, we get our back thrown out because of the boxes we're lifting. We have fumes that we breathe. We have things that go on even in our workplaces here in St. George. You don't have to go far away to find companies that work with dangerous materials. The guy that started Barry's Manufacturer, y'all know Barry's Manufacturer. They're a contractor for some of you, and they're just past Costco, the building with the flagpoles on it. And they make 1 million bullets a day in that place, and they plate them, and that process is a dangerous process, and it has plating. Any chemical plating has got chemicals, and some of those chemicals are explosive, and some of them are poison. Cyanide gas, for example, is a byproduct of some, and that company in one of its early processes had a bad fire, and it permanently blinded the founder of the company, Gilbert Berry's father. And he turned the reins of the company over to Gilbert, who's now retired, and spent his whole career from a young man running that company because his dad was blinded in an industrial accident that could have been fatal. And Gilbert lives in New Harmony, and I've heard him say, one of the worries I have every time I drive into St. George is the plant on fire. Is the plant still okay? He still worries about that. And they've implemented enormous amounts of safety and spent a lot of money making that plating line a safe line. Has anybody been in there before and seen that facility? It's pretty cool that it's right here. It's another one of those interesting companies that we have. They do injection molding for Wilson, and not all your injection molding, but some of the plastic boxes and housings and amplifier covers that you have are molded by them here in town. An effort to try to be less dependent on international, when we had supply chain problems especially. Could we pay a few pennies more for something here locally, but have more control over the supply? And many companies have gone on that journey to try to figure it out, Wilson being one of them, to try to move more supply to local, and you guys are probably, I mean, that's a never-ending process, right? Of selecting the vendor set that is working for us. But Barry's is one of your vendors in the injection molding area. Injection molding is another area that's dangerous, right? Injection molders there's ways, they're unforgiving. SKF in Laverkin had a molder that was a 950-ton press. 950 tons. That's a lot of pressure. Pushing a platen together and injecting mold, plastic into it. Lots of ways to get hurt in that. It's high temperature, high pressure, a dangerous environment. And so OSHA wants us to be able to go to jobs like that and go home completely safe, completely whole. And that is not just wishful thinking, that is really the law. But in spite of that being the law, if we were to ask these questions, when did we first hear about OSHA and what kind of light was that in? And, what is it that we think about OSHA and what do we think their job is? And I don't want to get involved in a long discussion on these questions, but many people had a bad impression of OSHA and still do. They think OSHA is the police, that their job is to punish us and to make our life hard and to judge us and fine us, and there's an easy way to do things, and then there's the OSHA way to do things, and it costs more, and it's more time consuming and awful, and we kind of have that feeling, and on occasion they've earned that feeling. I give you an example. I'm weighing whether I ought to give you this example. OSHA had a surprise visit at Wilson Electronics one time. And one of the fines that OSHA gave Wilson Electronics was that you had 3 drill presses. I don't know what the drill presses were being used for. They were back in the shop. And none of them had machine guards on them. I got a call. I was in on that conversation. And I go, what do you mean they don't have machine guards on them? They don't have machine guards on them. Okay, let's take a drive. It was lunchtime. I took them to Home Depot, which is a neighbor of Wilson's, right? And I said, let's look at the drill presses. Let's see how many of them have machine guards on them. None of them do. Home Depot sells drill presses. Lowe's sells drill presses. Every equipment manufacturer that sells equipment like that sells drill presses. None of them have machine guards on them. They're available if you insist. Mostly not from the factory, from aftermarket places. They're pieces of awkward plastic that go in front of the bit while you're, and they're in your way all the time. And the argument that we put forth was that the existence of a machine guard was a greater hazard than not having one. So you were safer as an operator as long as you had eye protection on and other things, weren't using gloves, other things that impaired that made it more hazardous. Then that was our argument. We felt that it was a pretty good argument. OSHA did not. And in the end, OSHA required Wilson Electronics to buy or fabricate acrylic machine guards that went in front of the spindle on all 3 drill presses. It eventually became enough of a hazard that Wilson Electronics donated those 3 drill presses to me, to the school here. Not to me, to the school, to the college. And I don't know if you replaced them with other drill presses or not. I don't know. But they were gone the next time OSHA came in to check up on whether you were using machine guards or not. But we inherited the machine guards here, and I had them in our shop for a while, and they were flat out hazardous. So OSHA means well, but sometimes they will get gung-ho on something and enforce something because they can that we would argue about. Now, fortunately, nobody had been hurt on your drill presses, and certainly nobody had died. And so there wasn't an instance or an issue that was on the table that we were arguing over. We were arguing over a what if possibility. And we were arguing about a piece of equipment that is very, very, very common. And there are examples of drill presses all over Washington County that never had a machine guard on them at all. I have one in my garage, but OSHA doesn't care about my garage. And it's not one of yours, by the way. They stayed here. they had fancier ones. So OSHA's job isn't to hassle us. OSHA's job, honestly, is to try to interpret hazards that we have in our workplace and help us figure out how to navigate those hazards without people getting hurt or dying. And that really is OSHA's job. When you look at how many companies there are and how few OSHA people there are, it's amazing that they found one guy to go visit Wilson, because they didn't have anybody at that point in time that even lived in St. George. They had to drive down from Salt Lake to inspect OSHA. Now they've changed that a few times over the years, both ways. They've added a person here, and then they've retracted that person. They work out of Salt Lake. And one of the guys that may visit the class works in the gun department at Ace Hardware on a side job, and you might run into him there. Kevin Larson is his name. Kevin worked for OSHA for a number of years and was an OSHA inspector here in St. George. He lives here in St. George. And he could add more light, or if you ever needed a consultant that knows OSHA's point of view, there are several that could help. But Kevin worked for them, so he would be a good first-hand person to check with if we have a question about OSHA specifically. So what do you think? Is it possible for me to migrate my thinking about OSHA as not being the police? And that's kind of a challenge I want to throw out on the table for all of us. At some point in time, we need to make a transition that says, OSHA's on my side. OSHA really wants everybody to go to work and go home without injury. And if we have a true hazard, then I want some help in mitigating that hazard in our workplace, especially if it's a necessary process that we can't live without. We got to do this process, but it's inherently dangerous. So how do we make it less dangerous? How do we assure that the person that's doing that is not going to get hurt, short-term or long-term? If it's a loud noise, I don't want their hearing to get shot. I want them to retire, hearing stuff. It's a beautiful world out there if we can hear people say, I love you, things like that. So OSHA, in that sense, is on my side. Something I want us to talk about and to have some knowledge of is that OSHA actually has two divisions. And one of the divisions is called the Enforcement Division, and their job is to inspect and fine people that are bad actors, people that are defying reasonable safety rules and regulations. They dig a trench and the person hops down in the trench, and if it collapses, they die. There's no protection in there. There's trench shoring laws that say you got to drop a brace in there to save the person that has to climb down in there. If it's me that has to climb in, there's no warning when those things collapse. And if somebody's down in it, we've had people in St. George die from being caught down in those places, and we've had many get hurt. And all of those are avoidable if we just do the proper, you don't have to build the brace, you rent it. It's a few bucks from Ahern or wherever, and compared to somebody dying, it's a very low cost, and it makes it safe. And if I'm going to climb down in there, I want to have that there, right? And OSHA wants to have it there too. Put me on the roof of anything in St. George, I want to be tied off so that if I slip and fall or lose my balance, that I don't hit the ground, that I get caught by the restraining system before I get hurt. I want that there. I don't want somebody going, oh, come on, you'll get used to it, And we've watched builders in town have guys up on the roof all day, and their only safety is the air hose that they're hanging onto. And they'll drape it over the roof sometimes and call that the fall protection. It's not. That's not what it's made for. That's not what it's supposed to do. And yeah, maybe you're a little bit faster if you're, tightrope walking without a harness, but someday you'll fall. And I don't want that. I don't want to be there that day. And so that's kind of the purpose of the enforcement division. They are the first thing that will stimulate a OSHA inspection is if they are driving by your place and they see a violation from the street, they're required to stop whatever they're doing and go stop it. Which means writing you up usually, but they have to stop the hazard. If they see a hazard, it's their job to stop whatever else they're doing, address the hazard, and stop it. I like that. I wish there's more OSHA people around in that sense. Yes, sir.
Sometimes I have the opportunity to work in commercial jobs, and and there's a lot of people there, the electricians, the plumbers, and all the stuff. And sometimes we've been instructed that OSHA council have to go home because we don't have everything the right way. The course, maybe the pill, and they might be the hazard. And sometimes, like, when you guys see OSHA, just pack and go home. And right now I'm learning, it's like, and I was looking the paper, how many people die for just, we missed that inspection.
Yeah.
Many people electrocuted and die for any accidents, but what is amazing is like, the owners sometimes of the companies, they would prefer to pay us the rest of the day, so they'll get a fine.
Yeah.
But they don't want to see like what we're doing wrong, so we
Yeah.
can fix it, because whatever we do, we'll do it next day.
Yeah.
Or whatever next month, or next job. Sometimes we work in Vegas, sometimes we work here. So most likely say, okay, you see those guys, just go home. It's like, and you had to do it because it was our law.
Well, what they're sending you is the message that they're willing to be out of compliance and they don't want caught. And that's, I don't want to work for that. I mean, everybody has a choice. If you got no job and that's your job, that's a very awkward spot to be put in. And I know people are put in that spot where they're asked to work unsafely, and we're trying over time to stop those conditions. And OSHA is on our side on that. We don't want, people have the idea that it costs more money to be compliant and be safe. And that's a very short-term point of view until they have an injury. And when they have an injury, I'll show you some numbers of what it costs. And when we have an injury, then they sing a different song. They go, well, let's stop that, because that was, somebody loses a leg at your business. It happened at St. George Steel. That's going to cost $150,000 or more. Just a beam falling on somebody's leg. And how much would it have cost to have shored that up correctly? Wouldn't it cost $150,000? There's one more chain, and to keep it from swinging in that case. And so we're not looking a lot of times at a lot of money to be safe. We're just, it's an extra moment. It's, don't use that ladder, go get the right ladder. So it's a trip to go get the right ladder. I don't have the right tool, so I use the wrong tool. And that wrong tool shorts out an electrical box and I get arc flash. Or, it's trying to hurry something that shouldn't be hurried. And I don't want anybody working under those circumstances or in that environment. And in time, we'll realize it costs more to be unsafe than it does to be safe. So while it's not illegal to send everybody home if OSHA's spotted, you can do that and shut production down so that you're not going to get caught doing anything wrong. That's more in fear that we probably are doing something wrong and we don't want them to see it, as opposed to there's a whole different approach. And one of the different approaches that I was going to talk about is OSHA has two divisions. The enforcement division is one. The other is the the consulting division of OSHA. I can call OSHA consultation anytime I want and say, hey, would you come to my facility, and we've got some questions on how we're doing things, and we don't know if we're doing it correctly or as safe as we ought to do it. We've had some questions. Will you come take a look? Now, the people we're talking to will say, we got to sign a contract first. And what they have to sign a contract is so that it's for you, not for them. The contract for you says that if they come into your workplace, they won't write you up for anything. You can be doing the stupidest stuff and they can see it, and you are not going to get a fine for 2 years from the time you sign that contract. But what you have to do is, if they point it out and tell you that's not the way you're supposed to do it, you're supposed to do it this way, then you have to start doing it that way. You have to be willing to change your system. If you agree to be willing to change your system, they will give you all this knowledge for free on how to do these things safely, and all you got to do is try. Say, okay, we'll try to do it that way. Let's do this. And they'll say, nope, that's not good enough. You got to do this. Okay, we try to do that, and no, they inspect, and every time they come in to inspect, you aren't at risk of getting a fine. All you're at risk is being told you're not doing it right yet. You need to change this or do this or try this, whatever it is. And so OSHA is 100% at that point on your side and giving you immunity. They're signing you off saying, as long as you're playing and you're seriously trying to do it right, we'll give you a break. We'll help you get it right. And that's the best time you could spend. You're at that point in time, the investigation side knows that you're under the consulting side, and they'll leave you alone, 100% leave you alone. And they'll even talk to the consulting people about you and your attitude. And if you're reflecting a compliant attitude and a spirit that you want to be safe and you want to have a safe company and a safe workplace, the consulting guys will tell the enforcement guys. So if the enforcement guys ever come in, they are more likely to work with you as opposed to punishing you. Because one of the grades, and we'll cover this in a little later time, one of the grades that they evaluate on is what was the violation and was it willful negligence on your part? So in other words, did you know better and you just flipped them off and said, we're going to do it this way, unsafely anyway? And if that's your attitude, then the fine gets much bigger and you can be imprisoned at that point as the principal of the company. So they can not only fine you, they can actually punish you with jail, with a felony at that point because of your attitude. So it makes sense when they see a violation that we have some discussion. I have a favorite little violation right here. This is on the floor under this workstation. What do you think? We use them all the time. Every desk at every company's got one of these because we got to recharge our phone. We got to play stuff. They all need a little bit of power, and so we got lighting. We've got all kinds of things that run off of more power than we have. When the building's built, they put an outlet there. That's supposed to do it, right? It doesn't, so we put a chain of these together. What's wrong with this one?
It's a big pile of trip hazard right under your feet.
In what way?
When you step off your stool and you start to walk away, you're going to trip on it.
You've seen me do it, right? You've seen me trip
Oh, yeah.
on this. Yeah, okay. And so it's a tripping hazard for sure, but there's something else. What this says is,
You have too many?
I don't. This is called, we call this a power strip, but they don't. What they call this is a relocatable power tap. That's what this is called by OSHA standard, a relocatable power tap. And a power tap is a plug-in, right? So this is a relocatable power tap. It is, it's got a UL seal of approval on it. That means that UL laboratories have checked this out and said this is safe to use. But if you go to the UL number that's on here and look it up and read what UL really said about it, is it's not safe to use the way I'm using it. If you look at it, it's got two keyways on the back of it. What do those keyways mean?
You're supposed to mount it to the wall or something.
It's supposed to be mounted to the wall. If it's mounted to the wall, this is legal to use here. If it's laying on the floor, this is not the kind of relocatable power tap that UL says can be laying on the floor, because all of these outlets are open. When I spill my Monster drink, I short out the power strip, right?
That also happens.
And I don't, which is also happening in this room, at this place. So this can't be laying on the floor. And so OSHA can walk into this room and they can say, hey, this is lying on the floor. This is not designed to lie on the floor. There are power strips that are designed to lie on the floor. They have caps that go over every outlet, like a little kid-proof thing. Snaps over so that if I drop file shavings or something, I'm not going to short out the plug. But the way this is a problem. And OSHA would have the right to fine me $7,000 maximum fine for this.
You can't put
You
caps
find
on
Dixie
it.
Tech, right?
Say that again?
They'll find Dixie Tech, right?
Oh, yeah, they'll find not me, Dixie Tech, yeah. Can I put caps on it? I don't know if there's ones that exist aftermarket to put on it. There are the proper pieces, or
It'd be cheaper to buy the right one.
when I put it in, I always put it up against the wall. So it's vertically mounted up against the wall, which
You can
I'm
give
gonna have to do
OSHA
that
all
at break
that.
time. So it's in the position it's supposed to be, and it's in the position it's been tested. It's not attached.
So they could fine you if they saw that,
I don't think they would,
really?
but they might, yeah.
Oh.
How do they know how much to fine a person?
That's up to them. There's a scheduled range, and the scheduled range usually has a maximum, but usually doesn't have a minimum on it. And I'll show you what they publish it. It's on their website, and so you can look and see what it is. But one of the more interesting pieces of that is, let's say on our shop floor at our CNC lab over here, we have a sign up that says that its safety glasses are required. Now, I've asked them to modify that sign because that's not our real rule. The real rule is safety glasses are required if you're working on the machine and you're close to where something could be thrown and hit you in the eye. But if you are in the taped off yellow walkway, that's designed to be a pedestrian walkway in a safe zone from the machines. Now, whether you think it is or not is your personal judgment. They determined it to be at one point. Our state risk assessment said the setback from the spindles on the machine to that walkway is adequate. I don't know if I agree or disagree with that, but it is what it is. And so the rule really is, if you're in the walkway, you don't need safety glasses. But the sign does not say that. The sign says they're required in that area. So if OSHA wanted to, the maximum for a safety glasses violation also is $7,000, but it's per person per day. So what OSHA would do if they walked into our shop floor and they saw people not wearing safety glasses, or a person not wearing safety glasses, they would stop, they'd write the fine up, they'd say that person needs to put on safety glasses, and then they would go to security and say, there's a camera in that lab, give me the last 30 days footage on that camera. And they'd start looking and counting how many people, how many days were there safety glasses violations in that lab. They would have a right to do that because they found a violation. Now they have a right to look at whatever they can look at. So they can look at notebook records, written records, see who had access. They can look at time clocks. They can look at all of those things related to who was there and could have been in violation. Now, that's if they really wanted to punish me. They're really mad at me, and really wanted to hammer me dead. That would be their approach.
But if your sign said within the yellow line, then if you would only get fined for that, right?
Yeah, we would be, only the people that were working on a machine without their safety glasses. And honestly, we're pretty good about it. They enforce that pretty much. And we try to help each other out. If we forget, it's like, oh, put your safety glasses on. So if OSHA saw that spirit that we're really trying, they'd probably just note it and write it up, but not fine us.
What do they do with all that money? I mean, like.
I'll address that in a
If you were
minute,
to
too.
just charge a person $7,000 each,
I'll talk about that too,
Where
because
is
some
the money?
people have gotten millions of dollars of fines. It still is not enough to pay their operating expense.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's not enough. Yes,
We just had a consultant walk through Wilson's,
did you?
yeah, and they told us the same thing about the signs. We just had them everywhere, like, no one's using them, like, well, don't
Yep.
really need them. She's like, well, get them off.
Yeah,
We don't need them at this area.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you're doing that, because when we look at, I'll cover this in another slide somewhere along the line, but we want to talk about what are the things that trigger an OSHA inspection. And we'll get to that, and I'll talk about all of them, but one of them is if you have a death. If you have a death, OSHA's going to be there. And you could see on that Fat Cat report that I sent around that there's a ticket number on it. And on that ticket number means OSHA's been there. And there's a few that don't have one yet. And I don't know why they don't have one yet from 5 years ago, whether they just elected that they have more than one and they didn't want to put that. I don't know why. But OSHA will pay you a visit, as they should, right after an accident that's a bad accident. They should be there. They should see, what are you doing and why did that accident occur? Is it really a cause that you added to? Do you have something that you participated in creating a hazardous workplace? And that's their job, to try to sort out and to keep that from occurring if they possibly can. So one of the things that triggers a OSHA visit, other than a fatality at your workplace, is a report or a complaint that's filed. So if we have a current employee or an ex-employee that calls OSHA, OSHA will show up. They will.
I've heard Wilson has had someone complain.
The very first OSHA visit was triggered by a complaint from an employee that did not work there anymore. They left with their hair on fire, and they thought the way to get even with OSHA, with Wilson, was to call OSHA. So they did, and OSHA showed up like they will. They don't always show up like the next day. Sometimes it takes a couple of days for them to respond. But OSHA will always investigate a report or a complaint. And so, we have a little bit, that's knowledge that's public. Everybody knows this. There's an ethics question there, and that ethics question has to do, why would you call OSHA? If you're calling to truly change conditions and have force in addressing something that the company's ignoring, by all means. If the company is not responding, get OSHA involved, by all means. If it's just because you're mad at them,
Bitter.
and you're bitter about your employment there or whatever, that's not ethical to do. That's not a fair reason to spend OSHA's resources to investigate something that's not a smoking gun.
But there's places that actually need it.
There are, and the time should be focused on those places rather than just getting even with a boss you're mad at. And so, that's part of the training that we should do with everybody on our team as we talk about what our rights are. If the company is not responding to a hazardous situation that worries you, you got no choice at that point. You've got to get OSHA involved because they've got a bigger hammer than you do. And they will force compliance if there's something that should be complied with. And like we talked about Barry's Manufacturing, they make 1 million bullets a day out of what?
Gunpowder.
Out of lead and gunpowder,
Yeah.
but out of lead. We've taken the lead out of paint because lead poisons us. And we never slough off the lead that our body has accumulated until some point our body responds and we die. And so lead handling safety at Barry's Manufacturing is of the utmost importance. You won't die tomorrow. The exposure to lead accumulates, but to pick up a big gulp cup that's got a straw in it that's been sitting in the workplace where lead, very, very fine lead findings have been falling on, you put that in your mouth, you're now ingesting lead. So you can't have a drink in that workplace that you might drink from. And if you're in the area where lead is being processed or worked, maybe you need breathing material depending on what the OSHA exposure experience is. So we have lots of workplaces where it's a normal thing. You got bullets at home maybe. They got lead in them. They plate them to kind of protect a little bit sometimes, but not always. Sometimes they're raw lead on there, and if your toddler picked it up and started gnawing on it, it's lead. And it's not safe, you know, and so working with lead also goes through your skin. So if I'm handling it by hand in large amounts or ingots or something all day, every day, I've got a certain amount of lead that's in my blood system just as it migrated transdermally through my hands. So I need gloves, right? I need arm protection. I need things that are going to protect my body from that exposure of something that a bullet company has to have. You know, it's, you know, what they do.
Steve, quick thing. Sorry for the distraction, but I have a buddy when he was about 12. He found a bullet and he wanted to make a necklace out of it. He thought that'd be cool. So he's drilling through the casing.
Yep.
And he shot a hole through the ceiling and through the bottom of the kitchen floor upstairs, like at nighttime.
Right on.
So the young kid.
Wow.
Anyway, sorry.
That's a funny story. It's because he was okay.
Yeah, because
Right.
he's not
It's a
dead,
funny,
right?
funny story because he survived it. It's not a funny story if we had we as a county, we had a discharge at Walmart distribution. They at this distribution center, they handle shoes, dry goods, and bullets, or guns and ammo. And they don't now. They did at one point in time. Kept it in a separate area, as you would expect, to keep the bad guys from stealing it all. And they had some pallets that fell off a forklift, and one of the bullets discharged in the case and shot across the distribution center. Didn't hit anybody, but it could have. And so that instituted a whole new safety culture at all of the Walmarts that have guns and ammo, and in the handling of the guns and ammo. And for whatever reasons, they don't have that at our distribution center anymore. It's in Corinne, Idaho, or Corinne, Utah, up north. Anyway, we talked about the Fat Cat report. The one I passed around, I don't know if you saw it, but let me depart from this for just a second. That's not the Fat Cat report. That's the Fat Cat report. So that's the Fat Cat report. I hope this has been long enough ago that nobody knew Steve Cox. Worked for the city of Hurricane.
Yeah.
Oh, Hurricane? You do know? Didn't know?
I just saw it on here.
Oh, okay, you already saw it on there. Yeah. And so you go, worker died after being struck by an excavator counterweight.
What's an excavator?
An excavator is a
Traco.
a crane-like item that digs holes
Oh.
or scrapes the earth. And the counterweight is on the back side of it. He was in the safe zone behind the excavator, where you'd think, but when an excavator swings and turns, that counterbalance moves, and it hit him, and it killed him. That's not okay. We need training, obviously, when we're operating something like that, and when we're the crowd that's around, when we're watching. The operator, typically on a Traco, by the way, is responsible for the safety area for marking or barricading or putting, cones up in the danger zone, the swing area behind that excavator, but they didn't. And somebody went to work and got hit. The other one that caught my attention that was on here, we talked about it.
How come some say unknown victims?
I don't know the answer to that. I didn't see one, so I'll look at it again. This is the one that
Means he was fired before before the accident?
No,
I used to have a boss that say, you fell, you fired before you get the floor, you know. You know, it sounds funny, but I don't know, maybe they're working under different contract or something, who knows? Maybe like a subcontract or cash or whatever. You know, some people say, you fell, like you fired.
Yeah. Well,
I used to have a contract that says that, but I don't know if he was playing with it or.
The sending the message of safety, you know, there are a lot of commercial truck driving companies. You have a truck accident, you lose your job, and it kind of, they tell you up front, and it kind of goes with it, whether you died or not, or whether you just scraped a mailbox at the truck stop. You know, it's an incident that they don't want you to have, and so it's punishable by. But this is the example that Elder was telling us about. This is the on the 5th of October 2016. Eric Holmes was the driver's name. This happened at Viracon, but he was driving a Swift transportation truck. So the fatality was actually charged to the trucking company, and actually the responsibility probably was the trucking companies as well, because my understanding was that the stopes of glass that were on the flatbed were not, it had shifted in transit. They were not strapped on correctly per the procedure. And so when he got to the dock to unload them at the proper destination, they were under tension. And as soon as he released the strap, it popped and hit the wall, and he was under. And, you know, we discussed that in class, and you were essentially witnessing the accident. You were in transit here to when it occurred, and you know, Damian Martinez, you guys worked with him for a while. Damian was the first responder there that day, and had to hold this guy's hand while he died. And if he was in this class at one time telling that story, and it was one of the more moving stories that any of us had ever heard. It was just horrific. You know, I think we all cried as we listened to the story and understood, you know, how horrific that would be to happen in a workplace. And to him, it was part of the processing for him to talk about it. You know, when you experience something like that when you go to work, that's not what we signed up for. That's not what we expected to have to do. And I think that was true of everybody that was there that day, and it even impacted you as you were on your way in during that as it transpired. It's just the unthinkable occurring at our workplace. And you know, we've had examples of that. We had the shooting at the mall in Salt Lake and at Valentine's Day, whatever that I forgot the name of the mall, but it's the old bus depot mall in Salt Lake, and the people that worked at the, you know, Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory never expected to have gunfire, you know, shatter the showcase in their little shop in the mall, you know, and you know, people died, and were, you know, when trauma hits our workplace like that, whether it's from a shooter or from an accident or whatever it's from, it changes our world forever. And that's something that OSHA doesn't want us to have, understandably, to have happen. All right. That's the Fat Cat report. I told you that we have to report this stuff immediately, 8 hours. There's a couple things on there listed as catastrophe, multiple fatalities. You know, as you read through the list you see killed in a trench collapse, killed in a fall from an outrigger, struck and killed by a well casing, struck and killed by a semi-truck, died after being buried in fill dirt in an excavation site, killed in a fall from the roof, killed in a fall from a ladder, struck and killed by a payloader, died of carbon monoxide exposure from a jackhammer that they were operating. So there are 101 ways to die, and OSHA is listing them here, and when you list them, you read them like that, you go, that shouldn't have happened, that shouldn't have happened, that shouldn't have happened, that shouldn't have happened. And we go down a list like this, and OSHA wants us to talk about it in these classes because they want us to repeat this stuff. They want us to get so ingrained that accidents can happen in our workplace that we are reacting and responding to things that are hazardous. All right, we're going to look at some pictures when we come back, but it's time for break. So let's take a break. We'll pick up here and look at some examples of safe, unsafe things. We'll talk about some others. We'll watch a video or two, and we'll be done for the day until next Monday. So we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Interestingly, Steve, it's also, I think, a healthy list to read because so many of those things that I just read, I've often risked myself.
Really good
Very
point.
things.
Yep. Yeah, and how many times have we been around at near miss of those very same things
So
too?
many.
Yeah, yeah. And just, sober up and really understand every time. Just take that extra second,
Yeah.
take that extra few moments and,
Yeah.
I'm,
Awareness is good. When you're a teenager, you don't think
oh,
you don't
man,
think anything can touch it.
we're bulletproof and made of rubber.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.